Montana Territory, late spring of 1877, the sun had not yet risen when the stillness of the valley cracked open with a gunshot. Penelope Briggs stood frozen behind the counter of her clinic, her fingers trembling around a glass medicine bottle. The sound had come from just outside. She knew better than to pretend it was anything else. That was not a hunting rifle. That was a warning. She stepped to the window, careful not to let her shadow stretch too far. Outside, dust kicked up behind 3 riders moving slow toward the front of her clinic. She recognized none of them. Their faces were hard, their eyes colder than the mountain air. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She had seen men like this before. She had stitched up their bullet holes and broken jaws after saloon fights. They were not the kind to come calling for bandages. "Dr. Briggs," one of them barked, his voice slicing through the early quiet. "We know you got supplies in there, morphine, whiskey, the good stuff. Come out now." Penelope backed away from the window, her breath sharp in her throat. She had no husband to step out with a rifle, not anymore. Her fingers brushed the small pistol in her apron pocket, but she had never fired it at anything living. She turned toward the back room where she had kept her husband's old rifle empty since the day he died. The clinic had been quiet for months. No patients, barely enough coin to buy gauze, let alone bullets. A second voice called out, "We will not ask again." She stepped back into the main room, drawing herself up straight. She had survived the cholera outbreak, the long winter, and her husband's fever that took him in a matter of days. She would survive this too. Before she could answer, a fourth sound cracked through the morning, sharper, cleaner, and far more final than the last. One shot. Then silence. Penelope dropped low behind the counter, her breath caught in her chest. Outside, a body hit the dirt with a dull thud. She heard horses shuffle, sudden shouting, then quiet again. She counted to 10 to 20 before peeking out. One of the outlaws lay face down in the road. The other 2 were backing their horses away, eyes wide, looking toward the ridge. A man rode in slow from the tree line, rifle across his saddle. He looked like he had stepped out of the wilderness itself, dust on his coat, jaw set tight, and eyes sharp under the brim of a weather-worn hat. He did not speak. He did not need to. The remaining outlaws turned and fled, kicking up dirt behind them. Penelope stood, gripping the edge of her counter, staring out as the stranger dismounted and walked toward her door. She stepped out before he could knock. "You shot him," she said, voice still catching. "He was going to hurt you," he said, as if that explained everything. She nodded, her breath leaving her in a rush. "You are not from around here." "No, ma'am." He took his hat off, revealing dark hair flattened by sweat and wind. "Name is Fletcher Gaines." "Penelope Briggs," she said, offering her hand. He took it without hesitation, his grip warm and steady. "You a doctor?" he asked, glancing past her toward the shelves and glass jars. "I am, depends on the day," he nodded. "Looks like today you still are." She let out a shaky breath. "Thank you for helping me." He looked down at the dead man in the road, did what needed doing. Penelope glanced back at the clinic. The door swung just slightly in the breeze, half open, like her whole life had been cracked wide with that single shot. "Come inside," she said after a pause. "You look like you could use water, maybe a place to wash up." He hesitated, then nodded once. Inside, the air was still scented with rubbing alcohol and wood smoke. Penelope poured water into a tin basin and handed it to him. Fletcher rolled up his sleeves and washed the dust from his hands. She watched the way his fingers moved, slow, careful, like he had learned the cost of rushing. "You always ride in and save strangers like that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. He let water drip from his fingers before wiping them dry. "No, just happened to be nearby, heard shouting. Saw what was about to happen. You are a good shot." "I do not miss when it matters." She believed him. He stayed the rest of the morning, helping bury the outlaw behind the far shed. She asked no questions she did not want answers to, and he offered no stories. But when she brought him a bowl of stew and he thanked her with quiet sincerity, something in her chest softened. That night, she found herself sitting beside him on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. "You planning to keep riding?" she asked. He shrugged. Had not thought that far. Town would not mind having someone who can shoot straight. There is no sheriff. Closest thing we had ran off last fall. You offering me a job, I am offering you breakfast tomorrow. After that we will see. He turned to look at her then, his face lit only by starlight. There was something steady in his gaze, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. I will take breakfast, he said softly. She smiled, and for the first time in a long while it reached her eyes. The wind shifted through the trees, bringing with it the scent of pine and spring mud. Penelope let herself lean just slightly toward him, their shoulders brushing. Fletcher did not move away. And for the first time since her husband died, she let herself feel the small, quiet beginning of something new. By the time the rooster crowed, the sun had painted the eastern sky in copper and rose. Penelope stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, frying cornmeal cakes in a blackened skillet that had outlasted her marriage. Fletcher sat at the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching her with the stillness of someone used to silence. You ever work cattle? She asked without turning. Some, he said. Used to ride fence out near the Powder River, moved stock for a trader out of Miles City after that. She flipped the cakes, letting them sizzle. There's a herd north of here, belongs to the Kincaid brothers. They're losing calves to cougars. Could use someone who knows how to track. I can track. He drank, then added, I don't take wages from men who beat their animals. They pay fair, but they don't ask questions and they keep to themselves. You'd fit in. He glanced toward the window. I'd rather stay useful here, if that's worth anything. She set the cakes on a plate and placed it before him. You think I need guarding? No, he said, cutting into one with his fork. I think trouble forgets how to knock. She sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. You planning to stay more than a day? He chewed, swallowed. Depends what you'd have me do. I could use help fixing the roof. Spring thaw did a number on the back corner, he nodded. I can mend shingles. You good with tools? Better with my hands than words. She looked at him then, his face drawn but not hard, like a man who'd been worn smooth by weather and years. That's all right, she said. I've heard enough words to last me. After breakfast, she handed him a hammer and pointed toward the ladder leaning against the rear wall of the clinic. She didn't follow him up. Instead, she walked down to the river with a basket and knelt beside the rocks, washing bandages she'd soaked overnight. The cold water chapped her knuckles, but she welcomed the sting it kept her present. By noon, Fletcher had stripped off his coat and hung it on a nail by the door. His shirt was damp with sweat at the back, and his hands bore faint splinters. She passed him a tin of salve and a strip of cloth. You're bleeding, she said. He looked at his thumb, barely nicked. Doesn't hurt, still needs tending. He let her wrap it, watching her fingers move with practiced ease. You always work alone, since last autumn, she said. There was a boy who helped run errands, but his family moved down to Helena. Not much left here but the tired and the stubborn. He raised an eyebrow. Which are you? Both. Her lips tilted, not quite a smile. That evening, a wagon rolled into town from the west, carrying a coughing child and a mother with dust in her lashes. Penelope didn't hesitate. She guided them inside, laid the boy on a cot, and mixed tincture from the herbs she kept hung in the rafters. Fletcher didn't ask what to do. He brought in water, chopped wood, and stoked the stove without being told. When the mother finally sat down, too weary to speak, Penelope knelt beside her. You'll stay tonight, she said gently. The boy will breathe easier by morning. The woman nodded, pressing a hand to her chest. Thank you. Penelope stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and found Fletcher leaning in the doorway. He didn't speak, but his eyes asked. They were headed to Butt. Wagon wheel cracked. They've got no coin. He moved aside to let her pass. Doesn't matter, she looked at him. No. It doesn't. The moon rose full that night, casting pale light across the yard. Penelope sat on the porch steps again, but this time Fletcher stood beside her, arms crossed. Do you believe in second chances? She asked. He was quiet a moment. Not exactly. I think sometimes life just hands you something you weren't expecting, she nodded slowly. And if you don't take it, then maybe you lose more than you know. She looked up at him, the wind lifting a strand of hair from her cheek. You're not what I expected. He knelt beside her, one knee to the boards. Neither are you. Their eyes held, and something passed between them, not sudden but sure. Not a promise, but a door left open. She reached out, not bold, just steady, and touched his hand. He turned his palm, lacing their fingers together without a word. Inside, the boy's cough had eased. The stove crackled low. And outside, beneath the stars, something quiet and real began to take root. The wind came down from the mountains the next morning, carrying grit and the first scent of wet earth. Fletcher had risen before dawn, already outside with a handsaw and a bucket of nails by the time Penelope tied her apron. She watched from the window as he hoisted a board into place along the back wall of the shed, jaw set, movements patient and sure. She didn't interrupt. Instead, she stepped into her storeroom and opened the ledger she hadn't touched since February. Ink had bled through the last few pages from snowmelt that had crept under the door. She flipped forward, tallying what she had left. 2 small bottles of laudanum, less than a pound of carbolic powder, and gauze enough for perhaps 3 bad wounds. The rest would need resupply, but the freight wagon hadn't passed through in weeks. When the boy inside stirred with a low cough, she rose and moved quietly to his side. His mother had fallen asleep sitting up, her head bent at an angle that would ache by afternoon. Penelope laid a folded cloth behind her neck, adjusting it gently. The woman didn't wake, but her shoulders eased. Fletcher returned near mid-morning, his hands dark with sap and dust. He didn't speak until Penelope handed him a wash basin and a clean cloth. There's a trail past the ridge, he said, wiping his neck. Fresh prints. One horse was shod in a hurry, irons crooked. She looked up. You think they'll return? They circled back once already. Don't reckon they like being run off. He rinsed his hands, then added, You'll need more than a pistol next time. She leaned against the door frame. I don't plan on letting it come to that again. His gaze didn't turn from the water. Planning doesn't stop men like that. A long silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just full. She stepped forward, voice low. What would you do if you were me? He dried his hands and folded the cloth before answering. I'd find someone who knows how to hold a line. Then I'd keep him close. The words weren't loud, but they struck deep. She didn't answer, just nodded once and walked outside, arms folded against the breeze. At midday, the boy's fever broke and his breathing steadied. His mother, now fully awake, helped Penelope boil linens and sweep the floor. She spoke little, her voice scratchy from dust and worry, but once she paused and looked toward the window where Fletcher stood splitting kindling. Is he yours? She asked. Penelope shook her head. No, he just stayed. The woman smiled faintly. That's the kind that matters. Later, Penelope found Fletcher in the stable behind the clinic, fitting new hinges to the tack room door. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You ever settle anywhere? She asked. He didn't look up right away. Used to think I would. Then the war happened. After that, it never felt like land belonged to me. You fought, he nodded. 5th Illinois Cavalry rode through Arkansas all the way to Louisiana, then the surrender came and I rode the other way. She walked closer, brushing sawdust from a saddle blanket. My husband never fought, poor lungs, they wouldn't take him. Fletcher's jaw moved, then stilled. He was lucky. No, she said quietly. He died in October, fever took him in 2 days. He didn't offer sympathy, just stood still, one hand resting against the stall door. I'm sorry. I'm not asking for sorry, I'm telling you so you know who I am. He turned to face her then, his expression unreadable but not closed off. Then let me tell you, I've lost men to bullets, to fire, to things I couldn't name. I've never stayed longer than a season anywhere since. But this place? His voice faded for a moment, feels like it's holding still. She studied him, the way he stood like the ground beneath him finally made sense. I don't expect you to stay, but if you do, I won't ask why. I wouldn't stay for a reason, he said. I'd stay for a person. She didn't step away when he reached for her hand. Their palms met rough, calloused, real. The wind picked up again, stirring the dust outside. A horse stamped in its stall. Somewhere beyond the trees, a hawk called once, then vanished into the clouds. Neither of them moved to break the moment. Not yet. Not when the world, for once, had gone quiet enough to hear what mattered. By late afternoon, the wind sank low, and a hush settled across the yard like a held breath. Penelope stood near the root cellar, apron pockets heavy with drying herbs, watching Fletcher knock the last nail into the new shed door. The rhythm of his work had changed, less urgent, more settled. She didn't interrupt him, didn't need to. They'd found a rhythm that didn't require filling the quiet. A soft voice drew her attention. "Ma'am," the boy from the night before stood in the doorway, thin arms wrapped around his ribs. "Mama says thank you." Penelope crouched to meet his eyes. "You're feeling better," he nodded. "She says we'll leave come morning, but I think she's tired of leaving." Penelope brushed his hair back, gentle. "Tell her there's no one pushing her out, not here." The boy hesitated. "Is he your husband?" His gaze flicked toward Fletcher. Penelope didn't answer right away. Then, "No." "But he's here." That seemed to satisfy him. He turned and padded back inside, bare feet quiet on the wooden floor behind her. Fletcher lowered the hammer and stepped down from the ladder, wiping his palms on his trousers. "South fence needs mending." "Saw it when I went looking for tracks. Too much snow weight," she said. "It'll take more than one pair of hands." "I'll cut rails from the stand near the creek. Might take a couple days." She nodded, but something in her chest shifted. "You planning to ride out again?" He studied her a moment before answering. "Not unless you tell me to." She looked toward the horizon, where the sky broke open in long gold bands behind the trees. "I could use the help. But I won't chain you to a place that isn't yours. Maybe I've had enough of drifting." She stepped closer, the distance between them made shorter by the way the day had folded around shared work. "What did you do before the war?" Father ran a smithy outside Galesburg. "I learned to shoe horses and shape iron before I could read. Thought I'd take over someday. But you didn't. I came back to Smoke where the house used to stand. Father was gone, mother too. I didn't see a reason to stay." The words fell quiet between them, heavy without being bitter. She reached for his wrist, fingers light against his pulse. "You've got hands meant for building." He looked down where her touch rested. "Maybe it's time I did more than ride from one fire to the next." They stood that way until the last of the light slipped behind the hills. That night, the small family bedded down in the loft above the clinic, and Penelope brought 2 chairs out by the well. She handed Fletcher a tin cup with warmed cider, spiced from the last of her dried cloves. He took it without speaking, but his gaze didn't stray far from her face. "You ever think about what's left when all the noise dies down?" she asked. "I try not to. I do. Sometimes it's the quiet that scares me more than the chaos. You don't seem scared now." She looked out toward the dark fields. "That's because I'm not alone." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know I've done things I can't undo, and I've seen things I can't forget. But if you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Not just to hammer fence posts or chase off trouble. I mean to stand beside you." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the weight of something landing where her grief had settled too long. She didn't answer with words. She reached across the space between them and set her hand over his fingers folded over hers, steady and sure. The moon rose high, casting silver across the rooftops and down into the folds of the prairie. Inside the clinic, peace held outside, 2 people sat close enough to share warmth, saying nothing more because nothing needed saying. The wind passed soft through the grass, and the night stretched wide around them, not empty, but full. The snowmelt had given way to soft ground, and the southern fence had sunk along the posts where the earth sagged beneath it. Fletcher spent 2 days driving new rails between cedar uprights, his shirt damp by mid-morning and dry again by dusk. Penelope brought bread and dried apples wrapped in cloth, and he ate under the cottonwoods while she checked the creek's edge for signs of erosion. They didn't speak much during the work. But every glance carried weight, a shared understanding not born of words but of habits newly formed and quietly kept. On the third evening, the boy and his mother departed, their wagon newly repaired with Fletcher's help. Penelope pressed a packet of powdered willow bark into the woman's palm before she climbed aboard. The woman met her eyes and said, "You've given more than medicine here." She didn't say more, and Penelope didn't ask her to. When they were gone, the yard felt broader, not empty, just cleared. Inside the clinic, Fletcher rolled his sleeves and scrubbed the floorboards clean where fever had settled days earlier. When Penelope joined him, he paused long enough for her to kneel beside him and dip her rag into the same pail. They worked shoulder to shoulder, their movements quiet, the scent of lye sharp in the warm air. "I've been thinking about building a second room," she said, wringing the cloth. "To take in folks overnight when weather turns bad." He looked up. "You'd need timber. There's a grove past the ridge." "Birch and fir, mostly. I'd need help bringing it down. I'll haul it." Her hands slowed. "You speak like this is already yours." He met her gaze. "Only if you want it to be." She sat back on her heels, water dripping from her fingers. "I lost a man who filled this place with noise. Laughter, stories, grand ideas. You're not like him. I wouldn't try to be, I know. That's why I want you to stay." He dried his hands and stood, offering her one. She took it, rising with him. Their fingers didn't part. That night the lamp stayed lit longer than usual. Penelope folded linen while Fletcher sorted iron tools along the shelf, each item placed with care. When the last wick burned low, she turned to him beside the hearth and reached up, brushing her fingertips across the edge of his jaw. "You carry everything like it's already been lost," she said. His voice was low. "I've just never had reason to hold on. You do now." He didn't move quickly. His hand came to rest just above her waist and he leaned in, slow enough that she could stop him. She didn't. Their lips met in the hush of the lamplight, not searching or hurried but certain. When she drew back, her breath was steady. "I never thought I'd want again," she murmured. "You didn't have to," he said. "Wanting found you anyway." The weeks that followed brought a rhythm neither of them spoke aloud. The clinic stayed open, and folks began to linger longer when they came for poultices or herbs. Fletcher repaired a neighbor's axle and helped a widow rehang a door. He never asked for pay. Penelope didn't comment on it, but each night she added a little more to the pot, and every morning she made a second cup of coffee without asking if he'd want one. They built the new room by hand. Fletcher felled the trees and milled them along the riverbank. Penelope sawed planks down to size, her palms blistered, her shoulders aching. He taught her to notch beams, and she showed him how to bind a wound with strips of boiled flax. One evening, as the walls of the new room rose, she leaned against the frame and said, "I used to think home was a place. But it's not. It's the way you bring in the wood without being asked, the way your boots land heavy on the boards but never feel like an intrusion. You've given me something I didn't know I could still have." "What's that?" He reached for her hand. "A future." The day the roof was finished, they lay in the grass beside the creek, the scent of wild mint thick in the air. Penelope traced the edge of his forearm, her voice barely above the wind. "I don't need a ring." "Not if you're here when the sun rises. I'll be here when it sets too." She turned her head and kissed him, the field quiet around them but for the turning of the leaves. By autumn, the clinic had become more than a place to mend bones. It was a place men came to ask after work, where children brought their scraped knees without fear, where the stove never went cold and the porch always had a dry bench. Fletcher built a porch swing from leftover pine. He carved her initials into the side rail and she didn't stop him. They married under the cottonwoods with only the wind and the creek as witness. She wore a dress the color of prairie sky, and he wore his father's old vest, mended at the shoulder. They said no vows. They didn't need to. Years later, folks would say the clinic at the edge of the valley never closed a single day, even when snow piled to the windows. They'd say the man who lived there could fix anything with his hands, and the woman beside him could make a man whole whether he was wounded in body or spirit. And every night, when the lantern was turned low and the porch swing creaked under the weight of two bodies drawn close by time and trust, Penelope would lean her head against Fletcher's shoulder and listen to the stillness. It never frightened her again, because she knew what filled it.